Welcome to the Alex Salmond Show, where we look at the political direction of a divided USA. For some, a dream, a nightmare for others. So declared a reincarnated Merlin in the film Excalibur. However, the sentiments could equally well encapsulate the range of opinion in a polarised America on the prospects of a Trumpian comeback. Biden-Harris presidential team have been in the White House for just over a year. But a year is a very long time in politics. While the new team's ratings look universally negative, the political prospects of the former president they drummed out of office are looking increasingly positive. So could there really be a Trump comeback? Well, we speak today to American experts on both ends of the political spectrum. Professor Keneshia Grant of Howard University, Washington, and Ed Martin, president of the Phyllis Schlafly Eagles Society. But first, to your tweets and messages in response to our show last week on whether the Omicron variant is a blessing in disguise.
Referring to Dr. Angelique Coetzee from Pretoria, Mary Murphy says, "What a lovely doctor this lady is. I'm so glad that she sent out the messages she did. They're very enlightening." Louise Hogg says, "Interesting to hear from the South African doctor. Too often the media never revisit a story after the initial breaking news episode." And her point about medical research and policy becoming divorced from hands-on practice applies to so many areas of life. It leads to so many of life's blunders. And finally, Amber says, "Fantastic show that covered all my questions." Well, we're pleased to hear it, Amber.
Now over to Alex with Professor Keneshia Grant of Howard University on how she rates the dangers of a Trump revival and what the consequences would be.
Professor Grant, welcome back to the Alex Salmond Show.
I'm happy to be back with you.
Now, when we last spoke just over a year ago, looking forward to inauguration, there was a lot of hope for the incoming administration and a lot of goodwill. Now, a year later, Ipsos polling is almost universally bad for the Biden administration. What's gone wrong?
Joe Biden ran on that idea that he would bring America back to some kind of stable and sacred ground. But what he found was that it wasn't possible because he had major challenges in the United States Congress. And so Americans are not particularly informed about or paying close attention to some of those challenges that have happened between the House of Representatives and the Senate. And so they have expectations about things that were going to happen that didn't happen. And they don't have a clear message from this White House about why those things didn't happen or whether those things might happen in the future.
But if the central difficulty you've identified is, if not gridlock, then a very, very difficult Congress, that doesn't seem like it's going to get any better with the midterms coming up at the end of this year. In fact, it could get decidedly worse. Does that mean there's any hope at all for the recovery of the Biden administration?
It could get decidedly worse. And most of the things I'm reading these days suggest that Republicans will pick up more seats in the House of Representatives, which would make it more difficult for Democrats to do the little bit of work they have been doing in that space. I think it's possible for him to get some things accomplished, but he will have to make it be the case that the American people are sounding the alarm that they absolutely want particular things and that they are pressuring their members of Congress to get those things done. One example I think we can point to is the pause of student loan payments in the United States. That's a thing that Joe Biden promised he would do, and he was doing it. It was happening before he came into office as a result of the COVID relief funding. And it's something that they talked about ending during his presidency for financial reasons. But there was such a large outcry among American student loan payers about their inability to pay and their unwillingness to pay that he had to change his tune on that. And so I think he's hoping that the same thing will happen for other types of issues across his agenda.
Now, the last president to plunge to such low poll ratings so quickly was George W. Bush. And his political fortunes were revived by 9/11 and foreign wars. Is there any indication that the current administration and their muscular policy towards China and Russia are looking for a stars and stripes revival in their fortunes?
I think that Americans are pretty weary. And so I would hope that they are not looking for that. I don't know that the American public would understand a conflict with China or Russia as a thing that would be good. It would be something that would bring us together, obviously, but I don't know that the Biden administration would be pursuing that for necessarily political reasons ahead of a midterm or ahead of a presidential election. Instead, I think what they are hoping is that we are actually near the end of the pandemic as we are experiencing it in the United States. And I think that they are hoping that by the time we get to the next presidential election, we are living without masks. We are back to having major concerts and other types of things where people gather in large numbers, and that people feel so good about being back to their normal lives that they'll be willing to support Democrats more so than a military approach to drumming up that goodwill.
Now, Vice President Harris seems to be having a pretty rough time. What do you put that down to? I mean, is that prejudice in the media against women of colour in particular? Or is there some indication that her boss, the president, is not giving the vice president the best of opportunities to shine?
I think it's a little bit of both. Before she even went into office, there was criticism about various aspects of her life, things she wore, the way she spoke, how her hair looks. And so we knew going in that she would face those kinds of things. And we knew going in that it would be difficult for some members of the press to know how to cover her, that they might not cover her in a hard-hitting way that's about the work that she's doing, but instead be covering her in a way that is more attentive to gossip and other things that we hear around Washington. And so I think that is absolutely happening in this instance. But I think the other thing that you mentioned is also happening. She had a very difficult portfolio. And so if you can imagine Kamala Harris, who was the senator from California, who was among the most liberal senators in the United States Senate, being responsible for immigration policy and having to go to the border and tell people who were coming to the United States, do not come. It puts her in a very precarious situation when she has to deal with some of these issues that nobody else wants to handle. And so I mentioned immigration. I'm thinking here again about something like voting rights or many of the other very difficult issues in American politics that would have been difficult for anybody, but certainly difficult for a Black woman, a South Asian woman, who is also dealing with having a media that doesn't really know how to cover her at this time.
Well, let's just say that you got a call in the next few days, Professor Grant, from the Vice President's office saying, you know, Professor Grant, we're needing a hand, come in and give us some advice. What advice would you give as an academic in politics to the Vice President to recover that ground that has been lost?
I think I would give her the advice that we need to hear more from her. It's the role of the vice president to support the president and kind of be in the background. And given the low numbers of popularity among this president, I think it might be useful for her to bolster their image. I think they could use some of the goodwill that she came into the office with as a way to help herself. And again, she has to balance seeming like she might be too ambitious with her support for the president. But I think for sure we need to hear more from her about the work that she's doing on the day-to-day instead of having that information funneled through media sources. And I think that she has to be given some of the feel-good things in this government that are happening as well. And so, for example, I was reading about the number of Black woman judges that have been appointed to lower courts and thinking about or ahead of this decision that will be made about a potential Black woman justice of the Supreme Court. And so that kind of thing that feels good, where we know the administration is delivering on its promises, I would encourage her to be a part of those things and to talk directly to the people about the work that she has done to make those things happen.
Let's look at the fortunes of the erstwhile President Trump. I mean, how surprised are you that a year after being chased from office in disgrace, the former president is now the bookies' favourite to be the next president?
I can't say I'm surprised. I think that I was actually surprised that he didn't win re-election given the climate of the United States. And so I'm not surprised that people who don't like the way that they think the president is operating would be looking for an alternative. And I think the further we get out from moments, from political moments, the easier it is sometimes for people to forget where we just came from. And so I can't say that I'm very surprised. What I am interested, though, to see is how the Republican field emerges. I know that there is a governor from Florida, his name is Ron DeSantis, who is increasingly popular among Republican circles. And so it's going to be the case that Trump has a bit of a run for his money in keeping the Republican Party broadly defined together. Of course, there are people who still support him and support him very well. But I think that this other person, DeSantis in this instance, and maybe some people we don't know about yet, might have the ability to pick off some of that support and might have the ability to make it less likely that he would get reelected. But I think in a Joe Biden, Donald Trump matchup, it'll be a lot of work for the Democrats to convince people that they should stick with Joe Biden because they haven't seen what they wanted to see from him.
For people of a democratic persuasion, looking at the hold that the President Trump still has over the Republican Party, are these people hoping in general that somebody else, like the governor, comes to challenge Donald Trump? Or alternatively, they think, well, just about the only Republican we could beat under current circumstances is a polarizing figure like President Trump?
There are some people who were never comfortable with Trump and would like to see the Republican Party go a different way. And so they might be interested to kind of sneak away from Trump or to do things that are different from what he did. There are some people like Mitch McConnell and Lindsey Graham who are taking positions that are separate from Donald Trump. And so we see that it is possible to have some differences, but I think the question is wide open about what direction that will go in. The governor of Florida, who I mentioned, is a very polarizing figure, and he is like a nouveau Trump. He is maybe a little bit further to the right and a little bit more extreme in his approach than Donald Trump is. And so it could be the case that what we end up seeing is a person who is like Trump 2.0. I think that, again, that there are some people in the Republican Party who would hope that there is an individual who represents the Republican Party who is maybe Trump inspired, but not as rough around the edges as Trump is. And so it just remains to be seen how that party is going to sort itself. But as long as there is a unified base of people behind Donald Trump, and as long as he is endorsing candidates for office who go on to win their elections, he will have a hold on the Republican Party that's undeniable. Those things are all still happening. He's still raising lots of money. And so he will continue to be something that the Republicans and the Democrats have to be very, very careful about because his time as a leader, as a person who people admire in that party, is far from over.
So what then finally keeps people awake at night in the United States? Is it the prospect of a return of the Donald, or is it the danger of a sleeker version of Trumpian philosophy who will add to the polarization of American politics and American society?
I think it depends on who you ask. For Democrats, particularly those on the left, particularly folks who are minorities in this country, I think they will be more worried about a sleeker version of Donald Trump. So if there's a version of Donald Trump who doesn't say things that are clearly racist, or a version of Donald Trump who doesn't do things that are clearly on the edge of constitutionality, I think that would probably be something that keeps people up at night. I think the idea that we have a presidential candidate, be it Donald Trump or anybody else, who loses the election and doesn't accept the loss of the election, and the potential for something else that looks like a January 6th event to happen again, keeps Americans up at night. We went through a lot during the Trump presidency, and so I think we have a bit more resilience than we had going into it. I don't think that we want to go back to that. Most of the folks on the left wouldn't want to go back to that, but I think the scarier thing is this idea that there would be a person who is like Trump, but maybe more charismatic than Trump, maybe more well-polished than Trump, who would do things that are detrimental in the long term to the United States, and who might create a situation where our democracy or the peaceful transfer of power cease to exist as we know it.
Professor Keneshia Grant, thank you so much for these fascinating observations on the state of play of American politics.
Thank you so much for having me.
Join us after the break when Alex speaks with Ed Martin, the co-author of The Conservative Case for Trump. We'll see you then. Welcome back. Now, even devoid of a Twitter feed, former President Trump's personality is dominating political calculations in both main parties. Ed Martin was the co-author of The Conservative Case for Trump. Alex interviews him now.
Well, Ed Martin, welcome back to the Alex Salmond Show.
Oh, it's great to be with you, Alex. Thanks very much. I always enjoy talking with you. Thank you.
Now, a year on from the inauguration, you must have a spring in your step. I mean, the Donald, and let's remember, you're the author or co-author of the Conservative case for Trump. The Donald's riding high once again and is the bookies' favourite to make a comeback in the next presidential election. Is it really going to be plain sailing for Donald Trump?
Well, I would say this. First of all, I don't celebrate anything a year out. It's true that Joe Biden's poll numbers are bad and all that kind of stuff, and that maybe in November 2022, Republicans will win. But a lot of things have gone in a different direction than I would have preferred in terms of, America now has a very strong regulatory state. Whoever's president controls that, and Joe Biden's policies, to me, are not helpful and not good. So, no, look, as to Donald Trump, the news came out in the last day or so because of our reporting requirements that he has raised, and I know the British phrase, the English phrase that the British love is an obscene amount of money. And it truly is an obscene amount of money. In politics, it's votes and money. And Donald Trump has a grassroots set of votes. No matter what happens, his old phrase, I could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and they'd still be there. Probably a third of the nation will vote for Donald Trump no matter what. And now he's got an obscene amount of money. So, if you ask me today, is Donald Trump going to run in 2024? I would say to you, he'd be crazy not to. He has all the things you need to succeed. And Joe Biden is really inept, and he's not showing any ability to change that. So I don't know if it'll be smooth sailing. I think the media and even the Republican Party, some portion of it, will make it a challenge for Trump. But it was never smooth sailing if you went back to 2015 and 2016. So I think Trump is used to that.
And are there any Republican rivals like Governor DeSantis, for example? Is he a sleeker type of Republican that might appeal to some Eagle Society members?
In our Eagles, and we're across the country, folks, our folks are kind of leaders where they are. And you're right about that. There's some folks like Governor DeSantis who gets a lot of attention. My home state is Missouri. Senator Josh Hawley gets a lot of attention. Mike Pompeo, the former Secretary of State and a congressman, gets some attention. There are some other candidates. Look, I think if Donald Trump doesn't run, the bench is actually pretty deep with talented people who have proven they know how to run for office. The question is always in my mind is Trump was uniquely situated to handle the media. He was really good. He'd had a decade of doing the Apprentice and 50 years of being a public figure. So, but I know, look, there are some, and DeSantis, as you point out, his courage in leading in Florida in the face of a lot of back and forth has been impressive. And he's obviously a smart guy, lovely family, all the kinds of things you expect. I would say that DeSantis in Florida and for the Democrats, Newsom in California are the two guys that if it's not Biden and Trump, those are the two favorites, I would say.
But unlike some of the other Republican possibles, Governor DeSantis has not said he won't run, if you can take that double negative, if Trump's a candidate. He's playing his cards very close to his chest.
Yeah.
Now, some Republicans believe the Democrats are a busted flush, so might the real fight be for the Republican nomination?
Well, I think that's right. Now, remember, DeSantis has to win in Florida, and he's up for re-election in 2022 as governor. And up until about, I'd say, 6 to 8 months ago, that was thought to be a pretty tough race. Now, a lot of the fundamentals in the country, sort of independent voters, have shifted, and probably DeSantis is a heavy favorite to win. But until 6 months ago, he didn't want to say anything that made the people of Florida think he wasn't focused on staying governor. But no, look, I do think all things being equal, and in politics, they never stay equal. Today, it's who wins the Republican nomination, who is an odds-on favorite. So I think you're right about that, but it's not going to stay the same, right? We're going to have a Supreme Court nomination. We're going to have Nancy Pelosi gave a speech the other day where she said she plans to run for re-election and she plans to retain the House, the majority. She's a master at raising money and doing politics. I don't like her policies, but she's a master. So they're not going to go down fighting. I think we're going to see a very energetic 2022.
And do you suspect the Democrats might have some other traps in store for the Donald, maybe legal action about the assault on the Capitol, or alternatively about his company's finances? Do you detect some sharks circling in the water about these things?
Yeah, and I'd be more clear, Alex. I would say it both the Democrats see the benefit of framing the post-election 2022 post-election as damaging to Trump, as well as you point out in New York they're doing an investigation. I also think there's Republicans that are happy to try to muddy up the water, and not just Liz Cheney or Adam Kinzinger, the ones you've heard about, but others that are saying, "Hey, let's move on." I've never heard as loud a resounding chorus of, well, let's just move on to somebody else, as you're hearing now. And that's coming from people that just think it's good politics to move on, but it's coming from a lot of people that don't want it to be Trump. My old boss, Phyllis Schlafly, who is famous for writing a book called A Choice, Not an Echo, where she talked about stop giving us an echo of the past, give us a bold choice. Trump is a bold choice, obviously. He was a choice that was different than anything else. And a lot of people don't like that. They want to go back to a senator who knows how the game is played, or a governor who knows how the inside thing works. And we're going to see that desire. So definitely they're going to try to tie Trump up. The newspapers can't stop putting Trump on the front page with negative stories. The question is, again, he holds his 33%, raises a boatload of money. He's in the game, and now we come down to a tight election in 2024. It's going to be something to see.
So should we expect a new edition of the book you co-authored, of course, with Phyllis Schlafly, The Conservative Case for Trump, way back 8-10 years ago? Could we expect a new edition of that book?
I actually have two books I'm working on. One is a pamphlet that's called What I'll Do as Speaker Trump. You know, the Speaker of the House in America doesn't have to be an elected member of the House body at all. It could be Speaker Trump. And the other one is on a second 2024. Yeah. But the real tension is, for guys like me, Trump's administration was a great success in some ways, a failure in others. I mean, on certain things like immigration, he didn't build the wall, right? I think he was tied up by some of the Congress in many ways, but there's improvement for Trump to make. And I will do this word of caution. If he's going to run successfully in 2024, a broader set of Americans need to hear why. It's not enough to just say, I'm Trump, I got robbed. He needs to say what this is about. But every day that Biden puts us in a position where we're about to fight a war, we're sending more troops to the Ukraine, I'm told. You know, where our inflation is going through the roof because many reasons, but one is that gas prices and oil prices are through the roof. Trump is going to be able to say, I'm different on those, and it's going to be effective.
But might a lot of Republicans like a muscular foreign policy towards China, towards Russia? Isn't there a reservoir of support there for President Biden among traditional Republicans?
Well, I'm not sure among traditional Republicans, but there certainly is this crossover. It's an interesting time in America. What we call the neocons, which is a large part of both parties that like to be more muscular out there and say we're going to reshape the world. They are certainly fighting and pushing this vision. I would say more traditional conservatives, and I think it's a larger number, more and more in the Republican Party, would have a clear view on the threat of China and the communist regime, or just call it the corrupt regime in China, and its threat on America. I think there is an America first problem. You need to focus on China. As to Russia and Putin and all the obsession from 2016 on, the media and Hillary Clinton and the left focused us on Russia. It's not silly, because it's been very, very hurtful and damaging to the country and the world. But I just don't see Americans wanting to. Why would we want to bolster NATO when Germany won't pay their share, right? I mean, we know this now. And by the way, Trump taught us this. I knew it, but a lot of Americans didn't realize that we're stuck paying for NATO, about to get dragged into a war with nuclear power Russia. Because why? Well, because Germany is dominating Europe in a way that doesn't make any sense. So I think that muscular foreign policy is not a winning position, either in the primary Republican-wise or in the general election right now.
Now, you said something a few minutes ago which is rather interesting about how even the President Trump, with all his grievances from his first term in office, has to articulate a new vision. Do you appreciate that, while it might be a dream for many Americans to see a return of the Donald, for many it will be a nightmare? Do you appreciate that?
I think as time goes by, Trump gets a little bit more appreciation, but you're right that 20% of the country or more is devastated by the idea, and that is a problem.
I wanted to ask, there was some talk that you yourself might be subpoenaed about the storming of the Capitol. Is there any chance of seeing you have to raise your right arm in front of the Congress?
I saw the same reports that you may have seen, but I have not. I haven't been subpoenaed. I will tell you, after the 2020 election, I did have a pretty unique position. I had been the election board chairman in St. Louis about a decade ago, and I did see and think there was a lot of irregularities that were going on. But like most Americans, and the great thing, Alex, about our system was we went through our constitutional system and ended up with a president. Did I like some of the way it was adjudicated? No, but so far I haven't heard more from what was published. We'll see what happens.
Ed Martin, energetic, passionate as ever. Thank you so much for joining me again on the Alex Salmond Show.
Always great to be with you, Alex. All the best. Thank you.
Just when we thought it was safe to go back into the water, the prospects of a Trump comeback are very real. And indeed, the last president is now the bookies' favourite to become the next president, albeit in a wide open field. Most tellingly, the sitting president is currently rated only a 15% chance to stand and win re-election. Presidential comebacks don't happen often. In fact, the sole president to date to leave the White House and then return for a second term 4 years later was Grover Cleveland in the late 19th century. It is a remarkable position that but 1 year after leaving the White House in disgrace, that Donald should be in pole position to be the second. However, such are the divisions in American politics that his presence still remains the dividing line on which people take their position on either side. There is little sign that the open political wounds of the divided nation are being salved or bound. But for now, from Alex, myself and all at the show, it's goodbye, stay safe, and we'll see you all again next week.